The first time Renata Vale understood that her client was trying to lose the air conditioning in the New Orleans courthouse had been dead for 2 days, and the whole room smelled of wet wool and storm. She would replay the moment for the rest of her life. Salvatore Conti was on the witness stand, a place she had begged him not to go, where no defendant in a homicide ever needed to be. And the assistant district attorney, a sharp young man named Delacroix, who could not believe his luck, had just handed him the one question that could end the trial in Salvatore's favor. "Mr. Conti," Delacroix said, almost gently, "where were you on the night of August 4th? It was the whole case. Renata had the answer mapped to the minute. She had 3 witnesses, a parking receipt and a hotel keycard log that put Salvatore Conti 40 minutes across the city from the body of Victor Reyes at the time the coroner had fixed for the killing. All Salvatore had to do was say the name of the hotel. She had walked him through it in the holding room that morning until the words were rote. The Pontchartrain. I was at the Pontchartrain. 4 syllables, and a reasonable doubt the size of the Mississippi. Salvatore folded his hands. He looked at the jury, not at Delacroix, at the jury. 12 sweating people fanning themselves with folded paper, and he let a silence open that Renata felt in her teeth. "I'd rather not say," Salvatore Conti said. The courtroom did not gasp. It was worse than that. It went still, the particular stillness of a room, realizing it has just watched a man step off a roof. Delacroix's pen stopped. The judge looked up, and Renata Vale, the best defense attorney in the city of New Orleans, with a record that had no losses in it anywhere, felt the floor of her career tilt beneath her chair, because she had just heard her client refuse the alibi that would have set him free. She was on her feet before she decided to be. "Your Honor, may we have a brief recess?" "I'm not finished," Salvatore said, calm as still water, and the judge, who feared him the way everyone in that city feared him, let him keep talking. And that was the moment the trial died, and Renata could only stand and watch it happen, her hands flat on the defense table, the legal pad with the words, "The Pontchartrain," underlined twice, sliding off the edge and onto the floor. What Renata did not know, yet what the people in that courtroom would never know, but what you, watching from above, can already feel taking shape, is that Salvatore Conti had not forgotten his alibi. He had not lost his nerve. He had spent more money than most men see in a lifetime to hire the one attorney whose name on a losing case would make the loss unquestionable. He was not failing to defend himself. He was working with the patience of a man laying brick to be found guilty. He had come to her office 3 weeks earlier in the first heat of the season, when the storms were still out over the Gulf and the city only sweated and waited. Renata Vale did not take walk-ins. She took the cases she chose, defended them flawlessly, and slept fine at night behind a rule she had carved out of her own history and never once let crack. Everyone is owed a defense. It was not a comfortable belief, it was a load-bearing one. She had built her whole life on it, after watching at 19 her own father go to prison on a case that had been quietly, expertly thrown a public defender who phoned it in. Evidence that no one fought, a verdict that everyone in the courthouse had treated as a formality. Her father had died inside before the appeal she financed through 3 jobs and law school could reach him. So Renata Vale defended the indefensible, and she did it perfectly. Because somewhere, a long way back, a man she loved had not gotten a real defense, and the not getting had killed him. Salvatore Conti walked into that history without knowing it was there. He was not what she expected. She had defended men like him before, or thought she had, men who filled a doorway and spoke in the soft register of people who have never had to raise their voices. But Salvatore had a stillness that was different. He sat across her desk with his hands folded, and he did not perform power for her, did not lean back, did not let his eyes travel the room. He simply looked at her, and the looking had weight, and when he spoke, his voice was low and even, and absolutely without warmth. "They say you've never lost," he said. "They say a lot of things. Is it true?" "It's true," Renata said. "I don't take cases I lose." Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not a smile. "Then we'll suit each other," he said, and he named a fee that made her stop breathing for a second, and he set a folder on her desk. The indictment, the discovery, all of it, already organized with a care that suggested he had read every page. And he said, "I'm charged with killing a man named Victor Reyes. The state thinks it can prove it. I'd like you to make sure they can't." She should have read the wrongness then. She would torture herself with that later. But the fee was real, and the rule was the rule, and Renata Vale took the case of the most feared man in Louisiana, the way she took every case, coldly, completely, and certain she would win. She built a defense that could not be beaten. She found the keycard log. She found the parking receipt. She found 3 witnesses who placed him at the Pontchartrain. She found the gaps in the state's timeline, and the softness in their forensics, and the bias in their lead detective, and she laid it all out for Salvatore in the holding room, and he listened to every word with that terrible attention. And then he began quietly to take it apart. It happened by degrees so slowly that at first she mistook it for nerves. He declined to let her call the second witness. He instructed her not to cross-examine the coroner on the time of death. Let it stand, he said, when the time of death was the entire ballgame. He gave an interview against her explicit, furious advice, in which he said nothing exculpatory, and everything that sounded like the cold confidence of a guilty man. Every door Renata pried open, Salvatore walked over and shut gently, deliberately, looking at her the whole time, as if daring her to understand. And then he took the stand and threw away the Pontchartrain, and she finally fully understood that her client was not arrogant, and was not self-destructing, and was not testing her. He was steering. Every time the case drifted toward acquittal, his hand came down on the tiller and turned it with total calm back toward the rocks. She confronted him that night in the holding room, with the storm finally making landfall somewhere south of the city, and the lights flickering, and the deputy outside the door pretending not to listen. "You want to lose," she said. She had stopped being a lawyer for a moment, and become only a furious woman in a hot room. "I have spent 3 weeks building you a wall the state cannot climb, and you are knocking it down brick by brick with a smile, and I want you to look me in the eye and tell me why." Salvatore looked at her. The single overhead bulb swung slightly with the building's sway in the wind, and the light moved across his face, and for the first time she saw something under the stillness. Not fear, never fear, but a kind of exhausted resolve. The look of a man carrying something so heavy he has stopped feeling the weight. "You're very good," he said quietly. "That's why I chose you. I'm so good that I'm going to win this case in spite of you, Mr. Conti. The evidence is there whether you say the words or not." "No," he said, "you won't." And then with a precision that frightened her more than any threat, "You'll do exactly as I instruct because you took my money, and I am your client, and the decision is mine. And when the verdict comes back, you will have done everything a brilliant attorney could do, and it will not have been enough. And no one will ever wonder whether the outcome was anything but honest." He held her eyes. "That is what I am paying for. Not a win, a loss that looks like the truth." She heard it, then the shape of it, even if she couldn't yet see the thing inside the shape. A loss that looks like the truth. He needed the best lawyer in the city, not to be saved, but to make his ruin unimpeachable. He was building an alibi for the conviction itself. "Who are you protecting?" Renata said. It was the first time she ever saw Salvatore Conti go truly still, not his practiced stillness, but the flat, frozen stillness of a man who has heard a door open behind him. For half a second, something raw crossed his face. Then it was gone, and his voice when it came was lower and harder than she had ever heard it. "There's no one," he said. "Drop it. For your own sake, Ms. Vale. Drop it and lose my case and take your fee and forget you ever met me." The lights went out. The storm had reached the city. And in the dark, before the generators caught, Renata heard him say one more thing, so quietly she was never entirely sure he had meant her to hear it. A single name, spoken the way you say a name you are trying to keep alive by not saying it. Lucia. The hurricane changed everything, the way hurricanes do. The trial recessed for 3 days while the city boarded itself up and the river climbed its walls. And in those 3 days, 2 things happened that pulled Renata out of the courtroom and into the dark gravity of Salvatore Conti's actual life. The first, someone tried to kill her. She was leaving her office at dusk, the wind already screaming, when a car with no plates came up the flooded street too fast, and a window came down. She survived because a black SUV, that had she realized later been parked outside her office for 2 days, came alive in the same instant, accelerated into the gap between her and the gun, and took the shots meant for her across its armored flank, while a man she didn't know hauled her down behind it by the collar of her coat. When the plateless car was gone and her ears had stopped ringing, the man who had pulled her down looked at her with flat, professional eyes and said only, "Mr. Conti sends his regrets. You'll be staying somewhere safe until this is finished." The second she stopped being able to lie to herself about why. Because she was a brilliant attorney, and brilliant attorneys cannot stop pulling threads even when they have been ordered to. Renata had kept investigating the Victor Reyes killing in the quiet hours. Not to win the case, Salvatore wouldn't let her win, but to understand it, and the threads were all wrong. The forensics the state was so proud of didn't fit a man Salvatore's size. The angle of the wound was low, upward, the strike of someone smaller. The defensive marks on Victor Reyes were consistent with someone who had been attacked first and fought back. And buried in a sealed juvenile-adjacent file she had no business accessing was a name she had heard once in the dark, in a man's voice trying to keep it alive. Lucia Conti, Salvatore's younger sister, 22 years old, a cello student at Loyola, who had no record, no connection to the life, and who had been 4 years running the only person Salvatore Conti had ever spent real money keeping out of his world instead of in it. You already know what Renata was assembling. You have known since the wound came in at the wrong angle. Victor Reyes had gone after the one person Salvatore loved and could not bear to be touched, and Lucia had defended herself, and the man she killed had died with his own knife. In the story somewhere, and Salvatore had walked into that room afterward and made a decision that his sister would never be a name in a file, never a face in a courtroom, never a girl who had to live the rest of her life as the thing that ended a man. He would be that thing instead. He would eat the conviction whole and take it into a cell and close the case forever. And the price was only the rest of his life. And to a man like Salvatore Conti, that had seemed clearly like a bargain. Renata understood all of it standing in the window of the safe house, watching the rain go sideways over the river 3 days before she was supposed to keep losing his case. And she understood the trap she was now standing inside, because she was the best lawyer in the city if she won, if she stood up and used the angle of the wound and the defensive marks and the key card log and shattered the state's case the way she knew how to shatter it. She would not free an innocent man. She would reopen a closed killing. She would point the law and Aldo Reyes directly at a 22-year-old girl with a cello and no idea her brother was dying by inches to keep her name out of the world. Salvatore had not hired her to lose because he was guilty. He had hired her to lose because winning would kill the person he loved. The safe house was a shotgun double in a part of the quarter the water hadn't reached, candlelit because the power was gone, and Salvatore was there when they brought her in. Out on bail he could afford, and the court could not refuse. Under the eyes of men who watched the storm-dark street through gun slits in the shutters, they did not speak of the case at first. There was something almost unbearable in the way he moved around her in that small, hot space. Careful, deliberate leaving distance, the way a man leaves distance around a fire he has decided not to warm himself at. He had a fresh cut along his jaw from something he wouldn't explain. He poured her a drink she didn't ask for and set it down at arm's length and stepped back. And the stepping back was its own kind of language. "You weren't supposed to keep digging," he said. "You weren't supposed to be innocent," she said, and watched it land. For a long moment, the only sound was the storm working at the shutters. Then, Salvatore Conti sat down across the small candlelit table from her, and the weight he carried came all the way to the surface, and he was, for the first time, simply a man. She was 19 the first time he came near her, he said. He did not look at Renata. He looked at the candle. "I built a wall around her you cannot imagine. New name on the lease. No connection to me on paper anywhere. She thinks I'm a businessman she barely sees. She thinks," his jaw worked, "she thinks the world is mostly kind, because I spent everything I am making sure she could keep thinking it. And then Victor Reyes found out whose sister she was, and he decided that hurting her was the cleanest way to hurt me. And he went to her apartment when I wasn't there to stop him. He turned the glass a slow quarter turn on the table. She did what she had to do to live. And then she called me, and I told her to put the phone down and the knife down and forget the room, and I made it mine. All of it. The body, the story, the charge." He finally looked up, and his eyes in the candlelight were terrible and clear. "If I am convicted, the case is closed, and her name never exists. If I am acquitted, the case is open, and Aldo Reyes spends the rest of his life and his fortune finding the hand that actually killed his brother. And he will find it, Ms. Vale. He is patient, and he is thorough, and he will find a cello student named Lucia, and he will do to her what was done to his brother, slowly, to teach me." He set the glass down. "So I will be convicted. You will help me be convicted. And she will live." The candle guttered. The rain came down like the sky had broken. "There's a third option," Renata said. "No," Salvatore said. "There isn't. I've looked. I've looked for 4 years for the version where everyone lives and I die, and it doesn't exist. I'm a man who's run out of better ideas, and a conviction is the worst idea that still works." "It doesn't work," she said, and her voice was steady, because this was the one place in the world she was unbeatable. This was the thing she was the best in the city at, and she let him hear it. Listen to me, you're a strategist, so am I. Your plan has a flaw, and you can't see it because you're too close and too tired and too willing to die. Aldo Reyes doesn't want you in a cell. A man in a cell is an answer he doesn't believe. He wants the truth, and a clean conviction of the wrong man tells him, screams at him, that someone is being protected. Your conviction isn't the end of his hunt. She leaned in. It's the starting gun. She watched it hit him. She watched the most disciplined man she had ever met realize in real time that the thing he had been dying for would not save the person he was dying for. It was the cruelest thing she had ever done to a client, and the truest, and the air went out of the room. Then there's nothing, he said very low. There's me, Renata said. There's the best lawyer in the city. You hired me to make a lie look like the truth. Let me do the opposite. Let me make the truth look like something Aldo Reyes can't touch. She would not tell him the plan all at once because the plan was dangerous to know, and because some part of her, the part that had begun against every professional instinct to feel the inch of air between them as a live wire, wanted to keep him in the room a little longer. That was the night the wall between them cracked. It happened the way these things happen in a small space, in a storm, with the power gone and the world reduced to candlelight and the sound of water. She had been working at the table, building it in her head, and at some point she became aware that he had gone very quiet, that he was watching her work, the way you watch weather, and when she looked up, the distance he always kept had narrowed without her noticing. He was standing close. The cut on his jaw caught the candle. You could have lost my case and walked away with the largest fee of your career, he said. Why are you doing this? Because you're the first client I've ever had who didn't want to be saved, Renata said. And I find I can't stand it. That's not the reason. No, she admitted. The storm pressed at the shutters. My father went to prison on a case somebody threw. A defense that wasn't a defense. He died in there before I could fix it. She had never told a client that. She had never told anyone that, not like this. I have spent my entire life making sure no one I represent gets the not defense that killed him. And you sat in my office and asked me for it. You asked me to be the thing I've spent my life refusing to be. Her voice didn't shake. She made sure of that. I would have done almost anything you asked, Salvatore, but I won't do that. He reached out. She saw the decision move through him, saw the discipline that had held for 4 years finally bend, and his hand came up as if to touch her face, and stopped a breath away. The way everything about him stopped, a breath away from the thing he wanted, because he had decided long ago that he was a danger, and that the people he loved should be kept on the far side of arm's length. I'm not a good man, he said. It was almost a plea. Whatever you've decided I am because I love my sister. I've done things. I know exactly what you are, Renata said. I read people for a living. I read you in my office in about 4 minutes. She closed the last of the distance herself, because he never would, because that was the whole tragedy of him, and her hand covered the hand that hovered at her cheek and pressed it the rest of the way to her skin. I'm not confused about it. I'm choosing it anyway. He kissed her like a man setting down something he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten his arms could be empty, and the candle burned, and the storm took the city apart outside. And for 1 hour, 2 people who had each built their lives out of keeping the world at a careful distance let one other person all the way in. It could not last the night. Of course it couldn't. Somewhere in the dark, a man Salvatore trusted was already on the phone with Aldo Reyes, and the audience who saw him slip out to the gallery with his cell an hour ago already knows the safe house is not safe. His name was Rourke, and he had run Salvatore's docks for 6 years, and the audience had watched him take Aldo's money in a parked car, 2 scenes back, so there was no surprise in it when it came only dread. The particular dread of knowing the knife is already in the room, and watching the people you care about fail to see it. Rourke had told Aldo everything, that Salvatore was protecting someone, that the lawyer had stopped trying to lose, that the conviction Aldo had been content to let happen was about to come apart in open court. And Aldo Reyes, who had never wanted a conviction, who had wanted the real hand all along, understood at last that the answer he was looking for was a person Salvatore would burn the world to hide. So Aldo did the math the way patient, thorough men do. He stopped watching the trial. He started watching Salvatore's spending, his old leases, his quiet money. And 3 days into the storm, while Renata built her plan by candlelight, Aldo Reyes found a name on a 4-year-old lease in a part of the city that had nothing to do with anything. Lucia Conti, cello student, Loyola. The climax did not come in the church or the penthouse of some other man's story. It came in the flooded, blacked-out city on the last night of the storm, and it came in two places at once. In the courthouse, which had reopened an emergency session because the DA wanted his verdict before the city's attention returned. Renata Vale stood up to do the thing she was the best in the city at doing, and she did not save her client. She destroyed the case against him in a way that pointed nowhere near Lucia, because she had spent 3 sleepless candlelit nights building the only door that led out without leading to the girl. She proved with the angle of the wound and the defensive marks and a forensic timeline, she walked the jury through like a tour guide through hell, that the killing of Victor Reyes had the unmistakable signature of self-defense by an unknown party. And then, the move that made the gallery rise to its feet. She proved that the state's strongest evidence against Salvatore, the thing Delacroix had built his whole case on, had been fabricated, planted, doctored by someone with access to the evidence room and a motive to see a specific man go down for a killing he didn't commit. She named the access, she named the chain of custody, and she let the jury draw the line themselves to the only man with the money and the reach and the reason to frame Salvatore Conti for his own brother's death, Aldo Reyes, who had known all along his brother died by another hand, and had tried to use the law to bury that fact, and Salvatore, both while he hunted privately for the truth. The case did not just collapse, it turned. By the time Renata sat down, her hands flat on the defense table, exactly as they had been on the day she'd watched it all die, the law of the state of Louisiana had stopped looking at Salvatore Conti and started looking at Aldo Reyes, and the killing of Victor Reyes had become, on the record forever, the act of a frightened, unknown person defending their own life. A person the state would look for and never, ever find. Because the only 3 people who knew her name were a lawyer, who would die before she said it, a brother in the dock, and you. But while Renata was winning the courtroom, Aldo Reyes was already at the door of a small apartment near Loyola. Because patient, thorough men do not wait for verdicts. Salvatore knew. He had known since Rourke didn't answer his phone an hour earlier, and you, who watched Rourke betray him, knew before he did. The instant the gavel freed him, Salvatore Conti did not savor it. He was moving before the room had finished gasping, out a side door, into the drowned street, into a black car that hydroplaned through 3 feet of water, across a dead city, toward his sister's door. And Renata was in the seat beside him, because she had refused, flatly, in the way he had learned not to argue with, to be left behind. They came through Lucia's door, into the worst tableau of Salvatore Conti's life. Aldo Reyes, standing in a candlelit room that smelled of rosin and rain, a gun in his hand, and a 22-year-old girl pressed against the far wall with a cello between her and the man who had come to make her death a lesson. "There she is," Aldo said, not turning as if he had been waiting. I almost didn't believe it. The great Salvatore Conti, the whole port, the whole city. He tipped his head toward Lucia without taking his eyes off her. And it was a girl with a cello. "You let me hunt for 4 years. You let me think it was you." His voice frayed at the edge, grief under the rage. "He was my brother. He went to her apartment with a knife," Salvatore said, and his voice had the awful flat calm Renata had heard the first day. The calm of a man holding something enormous, very still. She was 19. She did what anyone would do. Your brother made the choice that killed him, Aldo, not her. Put the gun down. "You took my answer," Aldo said. "I'll take yours." What happened next happened in pieces, the way these things do, and Renata would carry it forever. Aldo's arm straightened toward the girl, and Salvatore Conti, who had spent 4 years and his entire life arranging to be the one who suffered, who had taught himself that he was a danger to keep at arm's length, who had stopped a breath short of every soft thing he had ever wanted, crossed the room and put his own body between his sister and the gun, with no calculation in it at all, the discipline of a lifetime finally spending itself on the only thing it had ever been saving for. The gun went off. Salvatore went down. And in the half-second of horror that followed, Renata Vale did the thing she was not trained for and would never be able to explain. She had come through the door with a fire iron from the safe-house grate still in her coat, some animal part of her unwilling to walk into a storm unarmed, and she swung it, with everything she had, into the arm of Aldo Reyes as he tried to bring the gun back level, and the shot went wide into plaster, and the iron came down again, and then Salvatore's men were through the door behind them, and it was over. Aldo Reyes did not survive the year. Renata never asked how. Rourke did not survive the week, and she didn't ask about that either. There were things she had decided she did not need to be a witness to, and that was the bargain she made, eyes open with the life she was choosing. Salvatore lived. The bullet had gone through and through, high in the shoulder, and he sat against the wall of his sister's apartment, with Renata's hands pressed to the wound, and his blood on the floor among the spilled rosin, and Lucia, who had no idea who had spent 4 years believing the world was mostly kind, because her brother had bought her that belief at a price she would never learn, knelt, sobbing over a brother she barely knew, finally understanding a little of what he was. "You weren't supposed to come back for me," Salvatore said to Renata through his teeth, because even now he could not stop trying to keep the people he loved on the far side of arm's length. "I read people for a living," Renata said, pressing harder, her voice steady, because this too she would be the best in the room at. "I read you in 4 minutes. You're done deciding who's allowed to love you, Salvatore. Stay still. Keep your promise. Live." He lived. The verdict, when the city's attention came back to it, was already history. Salvatore Conti acquitted the victim of a rival's frame, the killing of Victor Reyes, an unsolved act of self-defense by a person unknown. The best defense attorney in New Orleans had her record intact, and a win she would never be able to fully explain in the way that mattered, because the truest thing she ever did in a courtroom was protect a girl she made sure no one ever learned existed. Lucia went back to her cello in a new city, under a name even better hidden than before, believing a slightly larger and sadder portion of the truth that her brother loved her past all reason, and none of the part that would have broken her. Salvatore let Renata arrange it. He had spent 4 years as the only wall between his sister and the world, and he was learning slowly, with great difficulty, to let one other person stand at the wall with him. They did not have a soft ending because neither of them was a soft person. They had something better suited to who they were, a candlelit table in a French quarter house, 2 people who had each built their whole lives out of keeping the world at a careful distance, sitting close enough now that the distance was finally gone. He was still the most feared man on the water. She still defended people the city wanted to hate behind a rule she had finally let breathe. Everyone is owed a defense, even. It turned out the ones who refuse it, especially those. She had stopped being able to imagine the version of her life where she had lost his case and taken the fee and walked away. On the last night, with the storms gone out to sea and the river back inside its walls, Salvatore Conti reached across the table and took her hand, not stopping a breath away this time, not keeping the careful distance, just taking it. And Renata Vale, who had never lost a case, looked at the one client she had been hired to lose, and had refused with everything she was to let go, and understood that she had won the only verdict that had ever actually mattered to her. "You're a terrible client," she told him. "I know," said the most dangerous man in Louisiana, and for the first time since she had met him, he let her see him smile.